Support for the Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you in part by University of Idaho, Idaho's only Carnegie R1 classified research university. Our Carnegie R1 designation recognizes the discoveries we make that help our forests thrive. It means we're creating more doctors and doing real research to strengthen cybersecurity for Idaho businesses, our energy sector, and every Idahoan. More at go.uidaho.edu/Idaho-is-Idaho.
Think you missed too much of the Idaho legislative session to catch up? Not even close. Our Legislative Roundup newsletter is following the biggest budget decisions, key debates, and everything else happening at the State House in one quick read every Monday. It's not too late to stay informed. Subscribe today at boisestatepublicradio.org.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. You're listening to Idaho Matters. It's Friday, time for our Reporter Roundtable. This is when we'll get you up to date on the news that made headlines around our region this last week. And today, our panelists include Sarah Cutler, reporter with the Idaho Statesman, Drew Dodson, reporter and editor for the Valley Lookout, and Lisa Letty with EastIdahoNews.com. I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and happy Friday to everyone.
Happy Friday.
And let me begin with, Sarah, some reporting that you've been doing. This is around Medicaid, because Idaho lawmakers are once again debating the future of Medicaid expansion, and they've got a new proposal that could repeal the program that currently provides health coverage for about 90,000 lower-income Idahoans. So, Sarah, can you first remind us what Medicaid expansion is and who in Idaho currently relies on it for health coverage?
Yeah, so this program is kind of for folks in the middle, those who earn too much to qualify for regular Medicaid, but not enough to qualify for Obamacare subsidies that might help them afford marketplace insurance plans. And this is a program that the federal government pays 90% of it, and then the state covers 10%.
So, Sarah, what are lawmakers who want to repeal the program arguing? And why do some legislators from both parties say the state might be moving too quickly? So let's start with, the argument about repealing it.
Sure, yeah. So, as I mentioned, the state only covers 10% of the cost. However, this program's been contentious for a few years because even with that, it's cost the state more than it was predicted to. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I think there's sort of a sense that the state bit off more than it could chew with this program. And people have, a lot of theories or about why this may be or reasons for this. There's sometimes accusations that folks are misusing the program, for example, limiting the number of hours they work to keep their pay low enough to keep qualifying for this program. Other folks say, listen, the cost of healthcare is rising nationwide, and this is just getting swept up in that. But yeah, in any case, there is that sense that the state maybe has taken on a larger cost than it was really prepared for. And as you know, of course, we're in a tight budget year, so folks are definitely giving that extra scrutiny now.
Okay, so then let's talk about the other issue. And this is that we have legislators, Democrats and Republicans, who are saying the state is moving too quickly. So why are they saying this?
Yeah, so this definitely came up in Monday's hearing in which this proposal was introduced to slash Medicaid expansion entirely. And the reason a lot of folks were pausing is that last year, this was also a big conversation. There were discussions about ending the program, but where they landed, was on more of I guess I'll say an overhaul of how the program was run. I won't get into too many details, but trying to administer the program in a way that could lower costs. For example, increasing work reporting requirements for folks who are on the program to make sure that they're working while they're on it. And those changes, that overhaul, was going to take a couple years to implement. As I understand it, those changes or the implementation is in progress right now, but it's not fully, it's not started fully. So there's a sense of, are we putting, the cart before the horse here? Maybe we should see our past efforts come to fruition before we declare them unsuccessful and gut the entire program.
And it's fair to note, Sarah, that voters voted for Medicaid expansion. I mean, this was an initiative that went on the ballot. Voters in Idaho said they wanted this. So the legislature does have the ability to take it away. That's how our Constitution is. So if Medicaid expansion were repealed, what would it actually mean for those roughly 90,000 Idahoans who are currently covered and likely would be difficult for them to find other coverage that is somewhat affordable?
Yeah, I spoke on Monday with somebody from the American Cancer Society, which has been pretty vocally opposed to cutting expansion. And at least his perspective, which I've heard echoed other places, is yeah, that a lot of folks would end up uninsured. And the way that he anticipates that playing out is, people will forego preventative care in particular, and they'll show up in an emergency room once they're in crisis. From his perspective, given that a lot of the state's concern here is around cost, he was highlighting the fact that emergency room care is very expensive, and any care once your health is in crisis is more expensive, whereas care medical insurance plans that would have covered those initial screenings and maybe caught things early, that may be what falls through the cracks without something like expansion. So he anticipated potentially higher costs for the state down the road.
So, Sarah, what happens next in this debate? Where is it? Where does it go from here?
Yeah, so this proposal was introduced on Monday in the House Health and Welfare Committee and got narrowly, the members of the committee voted to give it a full committee hearing, so that will have public testimony. I haven't seen a date on when that will be held, so it may be next week, but I don't think we know yet. So it's still kind of at the beginning of the legislative process. As I mentioned, the vote even to introduce it was pretty narrow and it was a fairly contentious conversation. So maybe a fight to move this through the legislature. And I would highlight to your earlier point about the popularity of the program and the fact that it started
Hmm.
with a ballot initiative. I think Governor Little has indicated that he's quite aware of that popularity and has not exactly expressed enthusiasm this session about the idea of cutting it. So should this make it all the way to his desk, I think it would be a bit of an open question about whether he would agree to sign off on cutting it.
All right. Well, we'll definitely keep our eyes on it. In other legislative news, Idaho lawmakers have passed a bill that could dramatically limit how cities here in Idaho regulate short term rentals. So things like Airbnb and Verbo. And this could potentially wipe out local rules that certain towns, in particular resort towns like McCall, already have in place. So, Drew, for people who have not been following this debate, what would actually change for short term rentals in places like McCall if this bill becomes law?
Well, I think the easiest way to understand it is really just that short-term rentals would be held to the same regulatory standards as long-term rentals. And I'll focus on kind of what that means in McCall specifically. Obviously, I'm a little
Hmm.
more familiar with that. But there are various rules that local governments have adopted across the state, specifically in resort cities, like you mentioned, Sun Valley, Lava Hot Springs, those kinds of places, pertaining to short-term rentals. And in McCall, those rules, the ones in question with this bill, were adopted in 2022. And essentially, it established special permitting processes. And in McCall, that would depend on the size of the short-term rentals. So, for example, short-term rentals sleeping 11 or more people in McCall were required to obtain conditional use permits under the city's regulations. Which what that means is it pretty much allowed the city council to take a look at these operations and um, impose mitigations. You know, it could be related to parking or health and safety, those kinds of things, to basically, try and the whole idea behind this from the city's standpoint was these are mini hotels operating in neighborhoods.
Hmm.
That was the stance that the city had taken. So all that goes away now with this new bill. This is House Bill 583, if you're interested in taking a look at it. And as I said, it holds short-term rentals and long-term rentals to the same standards. It prevents any of these special licensing requirements. Local governments will not even be able to require short-term rentals to have business licenses moving forward.
Mm.
Uh, it's, I mean, it really, most of what McCall was doing comes off the books on account of that. Now, with all that being said, the bill does, unlike past versions that have failed in the legislature in 2024 and 2025, it does carve out some exceptions for, like requiring smoke alarms in all sleeping areas, requiring carbon monoxide detectors, escape ladders from bedrooms on second floors that or aren't on ground level anyway. Um, but it really, there was one of the key things in the McCall process that goes away with this was there was annual fire safety inspections that were required to basically retain the permitting that the city was mandating on these rentals. That all goes away, and the key thing there is, and this was one of the big complaints from short-term rental owners, property management companies. Um, Oftentimes these fire safety inspections resulted in owners being forced to install newer, larger windows to
Mm.
meet fire safety codes. And what these owners described as just burdensome costs. All that's off the table now. If this bill is signed into law, that would no longer be allowed.
So, Drew, have local leaders reacted at all to the state basically stepping in and limiting, city's authority on this issue?
Well, I can certainly say in McCall, it's been kind of probably one of the top priorities for the city this legislative session. I mean, even before the bill passed the House, which was, gosh, close to a month ago, probably several weeks ago anyway, the McCall mayor sent out a letter to residents and basically calling to action, that these bills were coming down the pike, and what it would mean for the residential integrity of McCall's neighborhoods. And just to kind of give you a sense, there's more than 400 short-term rentals operating in McCall city limits. They make up a pretty good percentage of any given neighborhood in town. And so the city has very much so been concerned that this is going to have drastic ramifications on what it's like to live in McCall.
Mhm. So, my understanding, Drew, is the bill is now headed to the governor's desk. So he can sign this or he can veto this. Are you hearing anything about what he might do?
Uh, you know, I'd be out of line to try and put myself in the governor's head, but I certainly
Yeah.
haven't heard anything to suggest that he wouldn't sign it. I suspect we'll know within the next couple weeks that the paperwork hasn't been filed with his office as of earlier this morning. But once it is, he'll have 5 days to make a decision on that. So I expect to know pretty soon here.
Lisa, first, welcome. It's your first Reporter Roundtable. We're so happy to have you with us.
It is. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we are thrilled to have you part of our roundtable. And so, Lisa, you've been reporting on a really interesting story. In fact, more than 50 years after a 12-year-old Pocatello girl disappeared, investigators and researchers are actually still debating whether one of America's most notorious serial killers may have been responsible. So, can you remind us what happened the day Lynette Culver disappeared and why her case has remained such a mystery for so long?
Yep, it's a crazy case. It's part of my Factor Folklore series where we kind of explore things that people still question and debate in East Idaho communities. And one of them was Lynette Culver, Lynette Dawn Culver, 12 years old of Pocatello. Was she abducted and murdered by Ted Bundy on May 5th, 1975? And by all accounts, it appears that she was, and that Ted Bundy was indeed in Pocatello.
So, years later, Ted Bundy actually told investigators that he killed a young girl in Idaho, Lisa. So, what details from his confession actually line up with Lynette's case?
It's very eerie. And I actually, since my article posted last Tuesday, her sister, Lynette's sister, Nancy Albano, came forward and I interviewed her
Mm.
yesterday. So I have some fresh insight on this that just came down yesterday. And the family of Lynette Culver does indeed believe that it was Ted Bundy, but there is still room for some speculation and some debate because her remains were never found. But he did confess 15 years after she went missing and had details about the Culver family family that he probably wouldn't have known otherwise unless he was listening really intently to news reports and things like that. But he did claim that he abducted her near Alameda Junior High School, took her to the Holiday Inn in Pocatello, where he sexually assaulted her and drowned her in the bathtub and supposedly dumped her body into the Snake River, which is just horrifying to think about. But that is what he confessed to.
So, Lisa, as you mentioned, you talked with Lynette's sister yesterday, and she gave you some new insight into this case. What was it like, though? I mean, to sit down with her, because I don't think any of us can imagine um, what this does to a family, what this does for a remaining sibling, and also the fact that 50 some years later, this case has still not officially been solved.
Hmm. Yep, I was really impressed by her sister, just her humility and just the attitude that she had after what happened to her sister. The family, like I said, they do believe that it was Ted Bundy. And some of the information that she did tell me that she recalls, she was 4 years older than Lynette. So she was 16 years old when her sister went missing. And one thing that she did want to clarify is there were rumors going around that Lynette ran away, that she was out on the Indian reservation, she was skipping school, things like that. But she said that her sister walked home for lunch every single day. She lived near the junior high, and that she was simply walking home for lunch when Ted Bundy abducted her. And another interesting point that her sister told me that she has firsthand information on was that Ted Bundy was supposedly lurking around ISU. He'd been in Utah, came to Pocatello, and was lurking around ISU, the women's dormitories, probably looking for victims. And he showed up there that morning, the morning before Lynette was abducted, trying to get in. He was trying to sweet talk the security officer there that he needed to get in
Oh.
for whatever reasons. And thankfully, the security officer would not let him in and told him he had to leave. And Nancy believes that after that, he was driving around the different schools in Pocatello looking for victims. And that's when he found Lynette.
Mm.
And she said, I mean, obviously their family was, I mean, they went into shock. And she said that her dad, that tips were coming in and people were saying that she was spotted here and there. And he was flying all over the country trying to find
Mm.
her. Nancy said they also had an older brother that had left for the Navy shortly after that. So she was the only child left at home. And she said she was kind of nervous to talk to her mother or father about it because it always made her mother cry and that just things were
Oh.
really tense during that time. And another frustration that she expressed is that the Pocatello Police Department wouldn't look for Lynette until after 48 hours because that was just kind of the protocol then. They thought she was a
Mhm.
runaway and they didn't start looking for her until 48 hours later, which would have made a big
Mm.
difference, could have made a big difference in the case.
Yeah. So, Elisa, after all of these decades, is there any new investigative work or evidence that could potentially, you know, bring final answers to the family or officially solve the case?
Oh man, really the only thing that could potentially happen is if they found her remains. Otherwise, it's at a
Yeah.
standstill. I know that, the Pocatello detectives and the police department are always welcome for new tips and would love to have this case solved once and for all so that there wasn't any doubt to what happened. But that would really pretty much be the only thing. Ted Bundy's been executed and it's been,
Hmm.
51 years ago. So really the only thing that I can imagine could happen was if her remains could possibly be found.
Yeah. All right. Well, appreciate that update, Lisa. Sarah, shifting gears, as so many of us know, sugar beets mean big money in Idaho, in particular, southern Idaho. But sugar beet farmers are now saying that things like tariffs and then rising costs are actually putting their livelihoods at risk. So, can you give us a sense of just how important sugar beet farming is to southern Idaho and the families who rely on it?
Sure, yeah, this was something I learned a lot about in reporting this story. So sugar beets have been farmed in southern Idaho since about the 1940s, and they produce sugar that at the end of the process is just like cane sugar. And historically, it's been a really reliable crop that I think one farmer told me paid the mortgage amid the instability of the pricing of other crops. I think there are about 700 sugar beet farmers in the southern part of the state, and they have a co-op model where they co-own, I believe it's about three processing factories, and folks have shares and commit to, producing a certain amount of sugar beets each year. And talking to farmers, I definitely got a sense there's an emotional tie as well. There were a lot of third and fourth generation farmers doing this and, kind of passing down the family tradition. I think I heard people tell me that those processing plants have sent a lot of kids to college, that kind of thing. So
Hmm.
definitely a big economic and maybe even emotional role in the community.
I used to work as a television news anchor out in Nampa, and the sugar beet processing plant's not the best smell, but that what they would say out in Kenyon County is, what that smell is? That's the smell of money. But you've
Hmm.
reported, right? I mean, but in part of your reporting is that these outdated federal tariffs are part of the problem. So how exactly is that impacting the price farmers can get for their sugar?
Yeah, and I won't get too in the weeds of tariff policy, but as I understand it,
Hmm.
for a long time, American sugar farmers, including sugar beet farmers, have produced about three-quarters of the amount of sugar that Americans demand. So there's been a program in place for decades to basically allow some foreign sugar into the country to fill in that last gap, that 25%, while trying to keep it from being too much and having, so much foreign sugar coming in that it crowds out domestic production with lower prices. And the federal government basically did this with a multi-level tariff that said if you're in that quarter of the supply that we need, we'll take your sugar, but if it's above that amount, there will be a higher tariff on it. But the problem that I was hearing from farmers, and this is, I think, in the last couple of years and has really reached a peak, in around 2025, is that tariff amount hasn't been updated in quite a while, and it's too low, basically, with inflation and other factors. It's too small to really have any effect, so it's not really able to protect American farmers.
So, if these economic pressures continue, what could it mean for the future of sugar beet farming and these and processing plants here in Idaho?
Yeah, I heard, two different things. One was that farmers are adamant that they're not giving up easily. This is a way of life. This is something that's important to them. As I mentioned, there's a lot of attachment to the processing plants and a sense that they've helped a lot of families over the years. But folks were also realistic. They felt they need a structural change in the market. They need this tariff mechanism to be the right dollar amount. Otherwise, they're going to keep losing money on sugar beets, and they can't do that forever. They also highlighted, with inflation driving up some of their production costs and some other changes in the market. For example, weight loss drugs maybe driving down demand for sugar. It's a
Mm,
tough time. So I think there was a sense of fear that some folks might decide it's not worth it to be in this line of work anymore.
okay. So, Drew, some environmentalists are challenging a state permit. This is in regards to the Stebnut mine in central Idaho. And what they're saying is it doesn't do enough to protect nearby rivers from pollution. So, first, can you walk us through what this permit actually allows the mining company, sorry, to do with treated water at the Stebnite site?
Yeah, so first of all, I always like to start these Stib Night conversations just by orienting everybody to exactly where we're talking about. As you said, central Idaho, but if you kind of think about where McCall is, if you flew an airplane 40 miles east, that's about where Stibnite is. Pretty deep in the mountains. It takes roughly 2.5, 3 hours to drive there from McCall, despite not being that far of a distance. But with this water permit specifically that's been challenged by environmental groups, including the Idaho Conservation League, really what it concerns is what's called contact water. And that is any water that um, touched or flowed across exposed rock or that kind of thing, because that rock can actually leach off pollutants into that water. And the main source of that, there's a couple different ones, but the main one to think about is, this mine site would have three open pit mines that, they're dug deep into the ground. And as you do that, you start reaching the groundwater level. And so these pits, they become inundated with groundwater filling them up. And so Perpetua has to pump out that groundwater in order just to be able to be able to mine and not just have, lakes uh,
Mm.
with where they're trying to get into down in the ground. And so what this permit allows is them to pump that water out, treat it in a water treatment plant, and then discharge it into the East Fork, South Fork of the Salmon River, which flows through the project site, to the tune of roughly 4 million gallons per day.
So, Drew, environmental groups say the permit violates clean water laws. So, what specifically are they arguing that the state failed to require?
Well, they're saying that the state did not develop appropriate effluent limitations. Effluent is what we're calling the treated water after it's been run through that treatment process, more specifically, develop appropriate, and I'm quoting here, technology-based limitations. Um, I ran through the permit itself and reporting on it and looked at it, and it does include seasonal and year-round effluent limits that are based on monthly averages and daily maximums that these pollutant levels must remain within. But there's no metric for instant monitoring. And just to be clear, I guess what these the pollutants we're talking about here, they're things like mercury, arsenic, antimony, copper, those sorts of things.
So, Drew, what happens next in this challenge? I mean, could it delay the mine project, or is this just one step in a longer legal fight?
Yeah, yeah, I think it's probably just part of the overall legal fight mosaic. There's several of these challenges floating around right now, including with the main approval that was issued by the Forest Service for the mine. Um, with this specific challenge, there will be an independent hearing officer appointed to the case, and it'll follow that process and could eventually get to the DEQ board. We've actually seen this happen with a very similar permit earlier. It was an air quality permit that followed this exact same process, was also issued by DEQ, went through the independent hearing officer process, went before the DEQ board. DEQ stood by the permit, and that case is now in the court system as well, awaiting a hearing. I think it's in May. There's a hearing scheduled for that. So I think this is part of the overall legal battle that you're going to see with this mine.
Lisa, your coworker Drew Eaton was on the program a couple weeks back and first told us about the possibility of a semiconductor facility in Pocatello being sold. There's been a lot of chatter in the area about the future of this semiconductor company. However, it seems like company leaders are saying, well, there might be rumors, but the facility hasn't sold. I mean, at least not yet. First, can you explain to us what is actually happening with this semiconductor facility in Pocatello? And why are people, why people have started hearing these rumors that it had already been sold?
Yep, I will tell you what I know. I was really hoping I'd have some new information before this broadcast, but there's nothing new. But basically, LA Semiconductor in Pocatello, which is one of the city's biggest employers, was put up for sale. It was publicly announced that they were for sale in September of last year. And then after the new year, we were getting people texting us and messaging us saying that they were getting laid off, that there was going to be mass layoffs. And at that point, I did a story with the vice president of the company, and he did confirm that indeed the building is for sale, and that they were entertaining some offers, but nothing has been sold. And at that point, he was hoping that nobody would get laid off, that the facility would sell, and that they might be able to hire more. But then it actually took a different twist. And on February 9th of this year, the Idaho Department of Labor got a warn letter from the company saying that potentially 350 people will lose their jobs by April 10th if the facility is not
Oh,
sold. And so that's where we're at right now.
so Lisa, what would that mean then for folks? I mean, as you said, this is one of the largest employers in Pocatello. So would these jobs potentially stay if a sale happens? But it seems like it would have to happen in the next month before people get laid off.
Exactly. That's where things are a little bit blurry. I mean, because as far as I know, there has been the sale has not been confirmed, and officials are not talking. I've reached out to them numerous times to try to get more comment, and they just can't say anything because everything's in litigation.
Mm.
And the deadline, I guess, for the sale of the building is April 10th, and that's coming up pretty darn quick. So we should be hearing any day now if the building's sold or if these people are going to lose their jobs.
And are you hearing anything from workers about this, especially now about this confirmation of people potentially being laid off if there's not a sale that happens in the next month?
We have heard from a handful of workers, people that have just messaged us privately saying that they are already counting on their job being gone. Some people have already been laid off officially, from what we're hearing.
Mm.
And I know the mayor, our new mayor of Pocatello, Mark Dahlquist, has been on this story too, trying to keep tabs on what's going on. And he's still remaining hopeful and trying to keep the community hopeful that a sale will still go through and these jobs will be saved. But we just don't know yet.
Yeah, that's a big loss if this happens. Thanks for that update, Lisa. So,
Mhm.
Drew, McCall voters are going to be heading to the polls to vote on a new $10 million bond, and this would cover some rising costs for a pretty big upgrade to the city's water treatment system. Can you remind us why McCall needs to expand its water treatment plant, and then what's driving this higher cost that's now leading to this new bond request?
Yeah, so this is required by the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality per drinking water system standards. And specifically, the issue in McCall is not so much like, let's say, this time of year, spring, winter, fall. It's in the summer. One, when, we were talking about short-term rentals, Airbnbs earlier in the show. In the
Hmm.
summer, when all of those are full, that's part of what's going on here. You just have these population surges in town that cause water demand to spike almost three times over what McCall sees the rest of the year from, roughly 1 million gallons per day from the fall through the spring to over 3 million gallons a day in the summer. And so population is part of that. You have this seasonal population come in, tourists, all the Airbnbs are full. But then also irrigation. What's everybody doing in the summer? Well, they're watering their lawns, they're watering their landscaping, and how many nice resort properties and beautiful lake homes do we have around here that are trying to make sure that all the landscaping money they've put into them doesn't go to waste. And so, um, as that demand spikes in the summer, the city's water treatment plant simply can't keep up. And so, what this project would do, what this bond issue, and just to be clear, this is the second bond issue for the water project. 2 years ago in May, voters approved a 16.5 million bond issue to fund this same work. Well, since then, materials prices, labor market, all of that, the cost has shot up. Now they're seeking this $10 million bond issue, and it would expand the capacity of that treatment plant, and it would also build a new 2 million gallon water storage tank, which would essentially enable the system to kind of get ahead during these lulls because really the demand you see it most in the early morning hours. People are taking
Hmm.
showers. That's when a lot of these irrigation systems are running. So when that happens, this extra water storage tank would be able to supplement the system and reduce the overall burden on the treatment plant itself.
So, Drew, if voters approve the bond, what would this mean then for the average resident's water bill? And then how would that compare to the increases if the bond fails?
Yeah, so approval of the bond, which will be on the May 19th ballot, it requires a simple majority. So just 50% of the vote plus one vote. If it's approved, McCall water users could expect to see increases on their monthly bills of about $4 each in 2027 and 2028, and that's in addition to the typical 3% increase just to keep up with inflation. The alternative is the city could seek to cash finance this with steeper rate increases in the short term to raise that money. That would mean $15 increases on water bills in 2027 and $20 increases in 2028. So those
So,
are kind of it's
yeah,
kind of
they don't seem like a lot, but it does add up. And I mean, and Drew, I mean, affordability is certainly still an issue for McCall residents.
Totally. And I'm not an economist. I don't know how to do this math, but the way I think
Yeah.
about it is, because these bonds, they're repaid over 20 years. And so you're really only talking about 2 years of rate increases if it's passed in order to fund it. However, I think the key is that you have that annual 3% inflation
Hmm.
increase. And so what does that stack up to in the 18 years that follow? The $4 increases in 27 and 28. I don't know. I don't know those numbers. I'm not an economist, but I think that's really where the rubber meets the road with this.
Well, and beyond the project, Drew, I mean, what does this situation say about really the pressures that face these resort towns, right? Like McCall, when it comes to things like infrastructure and demand.
Well, it's everything. I mean, it seems like I spend half of my time writing about infrastructure deficiencies in McCall. You know, if it's not the drinking water system, it's the sewer system. I can't. I'm sure I've been on the show before talking about the sewer system, but it's the
Hmm.
same type of thing where you just simply don't have the capacity needed for these surges that these types of towns see because you're kind of in a rock and a hard place, right? Where do you overbuild the system for 75% of the year? Or do you build it to meet that seasonal peak demand? And you know, how do you it's a tough one.
Right. And it's on the backs of residents, right? I mean, that's a big part of it too.
It is, and I want to be fair also to non-residents and short-term
Hmm.
rental owners because again, going back to that conversation, the piece that always gets lost and a lot of the local debates surrounding short-term rentals is that yeah, a lot of these property owners and not just short-term rentals, but even second homes, you know, that aren't rented commercially, that are just families that use them a handful of times a year. You know, these homes are contributing an enormous amount of property taxes to local jurisdictions, and that helps. And they don't use the services the way that local residents do. So it's not to say that they're not contributing. I think it's just one of the difficult realities of having a population that is so seasonal.
Right. No, that makes sense. So, Lisa, health officials over in Eastern Idaho are offering free testing for several sexually transmitted infections. They're doing it this month because they say cases are on the rise, but there's also a nationwide shortage, apparently, of a really key antibiotic that's used to treat syphilis. So, first, talk to us about why health officials, they're particularly concerned right now about syphilis and other STIs over in East Idaho.
Yeah, this is interesting. So, Southeastern Idaho Public Health Departments here in Southeast Idaho offer this free STD testing quarterly for hepatitis C, HIV, and syphilis. But this time around, when I spoke with the nurse practitioner, he said that there is a sense of urgency because there's a shortage of bicillin, which is the antibiotic that cures syphilis, and it's one of the only safe antibiotics that pregnant women can take. And that
Oh,
was something that was of interest to me. I did not know that.
so Lisa, you mentioned this national shortage of this bicillin, and it is that main treatment for syphilis. I mean, do we know how serious that shortage is? And then I guess who would be prioritized for those available doses? I mean, if
Uh,
health departments get their hands on it.
Yeah, that's something that I learned. The nurse practitioner said that it's a pretty severe shortage, and that he is concerned. He said, from his understanding, that they could completely run out of it before the end of this year, by 2027. He said that there might not be any access to bicillin for a little while,
Oh.
and so they are prioritizing it for pregnant women because it is safe for them. So that's why they really, really kind of putting out a sense of urgency for anybody that might suspect that they have syphilis, especially if it's a pregnant woman, to go in and get tested during this free month of March.
So, Lisa, did the nurse practitioner tell you or know why there's such a shortage? I mean, to think that, I mean, this is the only effective treatment and it may not be available.
Yep, and I did ask that question, and I don't know that I have a real solid answer, but he said
Hmm.
that where it is the first line of treatment for syphilis, and there's I guess an increase in syphilis cases, not just in East Idaho, but all across the country, that there's a rising demand for the antibiotic, and for some reason there's some manufacturing limitations on getting it out, and that's all I know about that so far. But it does sound kind of concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so for people who are listening over in Eastern Idaho who may want to get tested, what have health officials told you about that? I mean, what do they need to know in regards to free screenings and possibly getting access to these screenings and hopefully access to this antibiotic?
Yep, it sounds like they've made it pretty simple. I mean, you can go into any Southeastern Idaho Health District department. They do prefer that you make an appointment, and it's totally free, very confidential, and it's just a minor little blood test with a prick on the finger. And I think that he said that you got the test results back that day, and that if you did test positive, there would be counselors and doctors on hand to help you proceed with a treatment plan.
Okay. And again, I mean, they really want pregnant women to get this treatment because it's the only way to prevent transmission to their unborn fetus. So I mean, this is something that I think people, Lisa, need to take quite seriously if they
Yes.
suspect they may have been exposed.
Hmm. Yep, and he also kind of expressed a little bit of urgency about HIV too, and hepatitis C is always out there, but HIV people think that that's not a thing anymore. But he did also mention that that's on the rise as well, and HIV is treatable. There's not a cure for it, but you can get it under control and live a long, full life if you test positive for HIV. So he did encourage people to get tested for that as well.
All right. Well, thanks for that update. That's really important information for people to know. So, Drew, a big debate going on in Valley County right now, and this is over motorized jet boats. Some people love them, some people hate them, and the issue now is should they be allowed on the North Fork of the Payette River? So, can you start by telling us what exactly is being proposed when it comes to motorized boating on the North Fork of the Payette?
Yeah, so we're specifically talking about the North Fork above Lake Cascade, but below Payette Lake. So pretty much between Donnelly and McCall. It's a little more nuanced than that. It's we're really kind of talking about Smiley Lane, which is just north of Donnelly. But for all intents and purposes for this conversation, we'll just say between Donnelly and McCall. That
Okay.
section is there is currently no motorized access allowed on it. It's been that way since 2020, when Valley County adopted waterways rules. And then within a couple years of that, they actually adopted a broader countywide waterways management plan. And so now they're starting the process of updating that waterways management plan. And kind of leading into that, they got a request from a group there. It's called the Western Whitewater Association, and it is
Hmm.
a power boating advocacy group. And basically, this group sought to open that stretch of river for motorized access. And more specifically, I mean, we are talking motorized access in general, but specifically, we're talking about what are known as mini jet boats. Um, you've seen the regular jet boats, maybe elsewhere on the North Fork, certainly on the Snake River or the Salmon River up around Riggins. These mini jet boats it's actually kind of neat. They're like not much larger than a jet ski, but functionally the
Hmm.
same as regular jet boats. And so, but because their size, they're able to navigate some of these tighter, shallower, narrower waterways. And so, what the Western Whitewater Association would like to see is basically seasonal access. They would like to see the current prohibition lifted, and they would like to have access to that stretch of river between Donnelly and McCall from April 1st through June 30th. And then as of July 1st, they would like to see that transition to motorized access with no wake, which would
Hmm.
I don't want to say largely exclude the mini jet boats, but largely these jet boats they need to operate at speed to be able to have maneuverability. Um, and so that's what they would like to see. Earlier this week, the county heard kind of the counter proposal to that, and that's from the
Mm-hmm.
Payette Land Trust, which they're landowners along that corridor and have some conservation easements, and they actually would like to see motorized restrictions tightened. From the
Ah.
existing ban, they would like to actually apply it also to tributaries along that stretch of river. So just the other creeks and streams that kind of feed into it. And their argument is that it's becoming a very popular section of the river with people floating in inner tubes and canoes, kayaks, anglers fishing out in the water, and the speed at which these mini jet boats operate coming up the river. They say that's just a safety hazard that's not tenable, that these uses aren't compatible. And so that's kind of what the county's grappling with right now.
Okay, so I've got less than 2 minutes left with you, Drew. Since the county is grappling with this, I mean, do we know when and if they may make a decision? And I've got just about a minute.
I'll keep it brief. So on Monday, the county went ahead and agreed to issue an RFP to seek help from consultants to kind of get all of the various different user groups together and see what can't be worked out as far as updating those rules alongside the waterways management plan update. As far as a timeline, one of the commissioners, was optimistic. Hey, maybe we can get this done by the end of the year. That that may be optimistic, but I would expect probably by this time next year. I mean, that's just my guess, but we're a little ways out still.
All right. Well, I appreciate all of our reporters this week. Sarah Cutler, reporter with Idaho Statesman, Drew Dodson, reporter and editor for the Valley Lookout, and Lisa Leet with EastIdahoNews.com. And thanks so much for listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. Do you have thoughts about today's episode? Make sure you email us at idahomatters@boisestate.edu or reach out on our socials. If this podcast has become a part of your routine, can you tap 5 stars and leave us a review? It helps us stand out.
Boise State Public Radio and Duck Club Entertainment present the Charlie Hunter Trio.
Charlie Hunter Trio, everybody.
Wednesday, March 18th at the Shrine Social Club in Boise. Blending jazz, funk, blues, and rock, Hunter is a guitarist, producer, and bandleader who will present his unique finger-picking technique on custom hybrid guitars. Tickets are available now at theduckclub.com.